Lawyers of Reddit, what is a detail that your client failed to bring up to you that completely lost you the case? Client said his ex owed him a lot of money and that she was trying to get out of paying him back by getting a protective order against him. Seemed reasonable, so I took his case. At the hearing, it came out that they were never a couple, that he was sending SX toys to her residence on a weekly basis, and that she never asked for the thousands of dollars he gave her over the years. Stripper. We lost, he got laughed out of court, and he learned a valuable lesson. Tell your lawyer the good and the bad stuff before trial. Story 2. There's so many. My dude in a custody battle where the opposing party claims he has a drinking problem and he denies it 1000%. Even after the real talk I have with him asking him to not hide shot from me, and to be honest, we go into court and at cross-examination the opposing party provides video evidence of him finishing work, driving to an abandoned parking lot to drink a few tall boys, and then going to pick up his kid from school. Every single access visit. He not only didn't tell me that, he forgot to mention that his ex's brother owns a private investigator firm. Effing idiot. Story 3. Guy in prison hired me to request a modification of his sentence because he was doing very well, completing a lot of optional programs, no rule violations, etc. He had his family come in and pay and everything to get started. I asked the family and the client if he had requested modification before, because the law said that for his conviction, he could only request modification twice for any one sentence, regardless of if they were granted or denied. Swore up and down he'd never filed before. You can see where this is going. After spending a few hours going over records and preparing documents, a copy of the CCS, the case record basically, finally arrived. He'd personally filed for modification 6 times since he was sentenced with handwritten pleadings that were all denied. So the one he hired me for was a waste of time and would never be considered at all. Story 4. I'm a court-appointed attorney for qualifying individuals in family matters. Termination of parental rights case. Have been fighting to argue that parent is stable, working lawfully, has a suitable apartment, doesn't need psychotropic meds anymore, ready to be a parent, etc. After a few months of negotiating with all the parties and Department of Children Court Services, we have a pre-trial to try and convince guardians. I meet with my client before the hearing to see if anything changed. Nope, all good, let's get my kids. Great, that's not happening today, but let's try. We get going in court. My client, who is super hot-headed and quick to anger, gets riled up and goes off on the guardians, screaming in open court. It doesn't end there, but reveals 1 that no longer is working, 2 that no longer an apartment, 3 doesn't want to have a relationship with guardians despite her kids loving them, 4 won't send her kids pictures of the toys they miss and can't have, 5 plans on moving out of state, 6 thinks they can live as a family off of state aid when she gets then back, and is 4 months pregnant. All in the matter of 15 seconds, I was too shocked to even react. Speechless. Not the image of stability and parental fitness I've been trying to paint since last July. Edit to clarify. Client was working really hard to get everything right and legitimately had everything going for her prior to this hearing. I was not making false representations or trying to get a monster reinstated. This was a true bombshell as I did my due diligence to make sure things were on the up and up and statutory requirements were met. Things feel apart very fast apparently. This was a very atypical situation. Parents typically do a really good job working hard to meet their requirements. Story 5. I wasn't a lawyer in this role but was a law clerk. This was a typical divorce case. This particular jury trial was about splitting assets and who would get what. It was a long, drawn-out case that took about 5 days. Right before the closing arguments, the attorneys wanted to talk to the judge. It seems as though a couple of days prior, the couple decided to get back together, and instead of telling the judge and their lawyers, they just kept it a secret. We heard 4 days of evidence, arguments, brought in experts such as land assessors, financial planning people, and the like, and they were back together. One of the attorneys asked to be dismissed from the case immediately and walked out the courtroom. The judge had to dismiss the jury, and that the couple was adamant that they didn't think that them getting back together was a detail any of their attorneys needed to know. Edit. Yes, in some states there are jury trials for divorces. However, this particular case wasn't for the divorce, but for a cause of action stemming from the divorce, marital property. It was a jury trial. Story 6. I'm a public defender in an area with lots of meth use. Meth makes most people talk, a lot. So I can't tell you how many clients forget to mention that they got to the jail still high and called their mom/girlfriend/buddy on the recorded jail phone and not only confessed to the crime, but also brainstormed whatever alibi or version of events I'm relying on to defend them. Edit. I'm seeing this question a lot, so I'll add some info here. This is not legal advice. Just explaining things a bit more. Calls to a lawyer are privileged and generally go through dedicated lines that aren't recorded, depending on the facility. Calls to family, friends, etc. through the normal phones are not privileged, are generally recorded, and can be used in court. There are usually printed signs near the phones and a recorded warning before each call that this is the case. Story 7. There's a rule you're supposed to follow when questioning trial witnesses, and that rule is to never ask a question you don't know the answer to. Despite this rule, lawyers often ask small, apparently inconsequential questions which are necessary to set the scene, but are so inconsequential or obvious that their answers are fairly presumed. This case was an exception to that general presumption. The defendant was arrested on a warrant and transported to jail. After booking him into jail, the officer returned to his vehicle and discovered a baggie of substances sitting right in the middle of the back seat. The defendant was charged with possession. At trial, the officer explained that he routinely searches his vehicle before his shift starts and after any time he transports someone in the back seat. The defense attorney tried to poke holes in the story, but the officer's testimony was remarkably call-consistent. The officer was fastidious about checking his vehicle. The appearance of the substances coincided with the defendant's presence in the vehicle. Then, as the defense attorney was running out of questions, he threw out the question. Was there anyone else in the back seat of the vehicle? It was a Hail Mary. Even when there are multiple arrests, police tend not to transport more than one arrestee at a time if they can help it. There was no reason to believe anyone else could have feasibly been in the back seat with the defendant. Though it's no surprise to you, the defense attorney and prosecutor were stunned when the answer came back as yes. Turns out the defendant was with his girlfriend when he was arrested, and the officer courteously agreed to drive her to her apartment before taking her boyfriend to jail. This fact was not included in the police report. The officer never told the prosecutor, and, shockingly, the defendant never told his attorney. There was a palpable pause as this fact sunk in. Since there was another person in the back seat, there was more than enough reasonable doubt. Proofs were concluded and the prosecutor threw out a half-hearted closing. The not guilty verdict was a given. Because of this case, I learned to never assume a fact no matter how obvious it may seem. Story 8. IANAL. And it's not even my stories but my dad's. He was working as a fraud investigator for an insurance company. I have a few stories of his, but here's 2 of them. Guy was claiming theft of multiple items but mainly a ring. Things weren't adding up, so my dad and the insurance company's lawyer decided to do a depot of him. Guy shows up and is doing the depot when my dad notices the guy is wearing the exact ring he's claiming was stolen. My dad slides a note to the lawyer telling him the guy's wearing the ring. Once the note got slid, the guy realized what happened and put his hands under the table and took the ring off. They asked him to stand up and, lo and behold, the ring fell to the ground. Another one is a guy claiming a break-in and theft. Immediately, things weren't adding up as the window was broken out instead of in. The guy submitted Polaroids of items he claimed were his, like TVs and such. Thing is, in the Polaroids, you could see the reflection of the store they were in on the glass. He also claimed numerous CDs/records, but oddly enough, every single one started with an R, S, or a T. We're talking hundreds of CDs/records. My dad was about to deny the claim in person, but noticed he had a gun on the table, so decided to do it over the phone. Ready for an escalation? Later, this same guy was arrested for beheading a P-Tootie and throwing her head in the river. Story 9. My father is a judge. I remember him talking about a case where a woman was suing for a severe back injury that she said was preventing her from working and taking care of her kids and so on. In the middle of the trial, a pen rolled off the table, and she is bending over trying to reach it from her chair, but pen was too far away. So she stands up and bends over and picks it up and goes back to her seat as if nothing is out of the ordinary. My dad is just looking at her and she snaps at my dad and goes, "What are you staring at?" My dad asked her if she was okay, and her response was that she was fine. Her attorney leaned over and said something to her, and she then loudly started complaining about her back and how much her back hurt, but no one believed her LOL story. 10. This one ended my marriage. Well, it was the start of the end of marriage. My husband lost his job in the title mortgage business. Applied for unemployment, got denied. I decided to help him with his appeal hearing. I asked him multiple times before the hearing, "Is there anything you did that caused them fire you?" He says no. Absolutely not. They fired him out of nowhere. Hearing day comes. He testifies under oath that he did nothing wrong, was a good employee, no issues. Upon cross-examination, the other attorney pulls out documents from one of his real estate closings, documents he forged and backdated. Had to admit he perjured himself. Needless to say, he didn't get unemployment and he didn't sleep at home that night. Damn, that's rough. It's one thing to lie to a stranger, but to your spouse when they are supporting you? A friend of mine was married to some kind of technician. He worked, among other things, installing and repairing elevators. One day, one of the customers sues him for destroying an elevator, and the husband denies having anything to do. My friend is enraged and, together with the husband's lawyer, goes over all the evidence and the documents to prepare a rock-solid defense. And suddenly, my friend realizes that a lot of things don't add up. She asks her husband, "Please be honest with me, did you do it?" Several times, which always causes the husband to explode at her and accuse her of being a bad wife. And then, a couple days before the beginning of the trial, he comes to her hanging his head low and admits that it was him. The customer ended the maintenance contract, and in retaliation, this guy showed up with a hammer outside business hours and trashed the elevator. My friend was livid. If they didn't have children, she would have divorced him.